The smell hit me before anything else. Pot roast and garlic bread. Maybe a hint of something sweet apple pie? I thought, my aunt's house always smelled like a cooking show on Sunday afternoons. And that day was no different. I stood on the front porch for a moment longer than necessary, my hand resting on the door handle, just breathing it in. I hadn't been home in almost 8 months. Whatever tension came with that visit, at least the house smelled the same. I pushed open the door. "She's here," my cousin called from somewhere in the back. I could hear the clatter of dishes, my uncle's laugh, the low murmur of a football game. Nobody was actually watching. I let the screen door close behind me and dropped my keys in the little ceramic bowl by the entryway. The one my grandmother painted at a craft fair in 1987. Still there, still chipped on one side. My mother appeared from the hallway. She looked good. A little tired around the eyes. Maybe. But good. She pulled me into a hug and held on just a beat too long. "I'm glad you came," she said into my shoulder. "Of course," I said. "It's Grandma Clara's 80th. I wasn't going to miss it." She pulled back and looked at my face. Something moved behind her eyes. Not quite worry. Not quite relief. Something in between. I almost asked her about it right there in the entryway. But my aunt swooped in from the kitchen with flour on her apron, and the conversation shifted. And I let the moment pass. I should not have let it pass. The dining room was loud and bright, and full of people I hadn't seen in months. My uncle stood at the head of the table, slicing a brisket. My cousin was arguing with her husband about something involving a fantasy football trade. Grandma Clara sat at the far end in the chair we'd put a cushion on because her back had been bothering her. She looked sharp, though, in her blue dress, the one she always wore to important dinners. Her hair was done. She'd gotten a blowout, which meant she'd been planning this evening for weeks. I made my way around the table, squeezing shoulders, kissing cheeks, answering the same question. "How's the job? How's the apartment? Are you seeing anyone?" about 7 times, with 7 slightly different versions of the same answer. "Fine? Good. Not really." And then I saw her. She was standing near the sideboard, helping herself to a glass of wine. And I almost didn't recognize her at first. She'd cut her hair since the last time I'd seen her. It was shorter now. Neater. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and pressed slacks. And she looked, by all appearances, like a perfectly normal person at a perfectly normal family dinner. Her name was Tara. She was my uncle's wife. His second wife. They'd married about 3 years ago. Relatively quickly after his first marriage ended. I hadn't been at the wedding. I'd had what I told myself was a legitimate conflict. But the truth was, I just hadn't liked what I knew about her. And I hadn't been ready to sit in a church and smile about it. She caught me looking and smiled. I smiled back. Because that's what you do. Dinner was already laid out: the brisket, roasted potatoes, green beans with almonds, a cranberry salad, the garlic bread I'd smelled from outside. My aunt had been cooking since Friday. I was pretty sure. A separate table against the wall held Grandma Clara's birthday cake, 3 tiers, lemon with buttercream. The whole setup was beautiful. It looked like something from a magazine. I found my seat between my mother and my youngest cousin, who was 12 and currently obsessed with a card game I didn't understand. He explained 3 rounds of it to me while I unfolded my napkin. I nodded along. I understood none of it. Grandma Clara was telling a story about a road trip she and Grandpa had taken in 1974. A story but nobody stopped her. It was her birthday. She could tell it 4 times if she wanted to. My mother leaned over to refill my water glass, and her hand brushed mine under the table. It was fast, casual looking. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice if you weren't paying attention. But when she pulled her hand away, there was something in mine. A piece of paper, folded small, the kind you'd tear from a notepad. I looked at her. She was already facing forward again, listening to Grandma Clara's story, her face completely neutral. My heart did something strange. I kept my hand in my lap and unfolded the paper slowly, just enough to read it. Her handwriting small and slanted, the same as it's been my whole life. Don't eat the potatoes. Don't make a face. Just trust me. I read it twice. I set my hands flat on my thighs and breathed. Don't eat the potatoes. What did that mean? Was she serious? The potatoes were right there. A big serving dish in the center of the table. Golden and fragrant. Everyone already spooning them onto their plates. My cousin had taken a double portion. My uncle had already eaten half of his. I looked at my mother. She gave me the smallest nod. I looked at the potatoes. I looked at Tara. She was ladling a portion onto Grandma Clara's plate, leaning over with the serving spoon, smiling at something my uncle was saying. She hadn't touched the potatoes on her own plate. I watched her. Her plate had brisket, green beans, a small piece of bread, no potatoes. The serving dish had come from her side of the table. I picked up my fork. I moved some brisket around my plate. I said something to my cousin about the card game. I was running on autopilot when my aunt asked if anyone wanted more potatoes. I said I was saving room for cake. It sounded normal. My voice sounded normal. I have no idea how. 40 minutes into dinner, Grandma Clara stopped mid-sentence. She'd been talking about the return drive from that 1974 road trip. Something about a breakdown outside of Nashville. And she just stopped. She set down her fork very carefully. She put her hand to her chest. Clara. My uncle stood up immediately. I just feel a little. She didn't finish. Her face had gone pale. She reached for the edge of the table. My aunt was around the table in seconds. My cousin's husband was already on his phone. Someone said, "Call 911." Someone else said she probably just needs water. My uncle was kneeling beside her chair. My youngest cousin had gone very still. I looked at my mother. She was already looking at me. Her face was calm in the way you go calm when you've been bracing for something. She reached under the table and took my hand and held it. Grandma Clara was coherent. She didn't lose consciousness. She said she felt sick to her stomach, that her hands were tingling. The paramedics arrived in less than 10 minutes. They were kind and efficient, and they moved Grandma Clara out on a stretcher. And the whole family followed the ambulance in 2 cars. And I sat in the back seat of my mother's car, staring at my own hands and not saying anything. My mother drove. About 3 blocks from the house. She spoke. "The potatoes." She said, "I know." I said, "I didn't know for certain. I want you to understand that I didn't have proof. She exhaled slowly. I watched her bring that dish out of the kitchen. She'd offered to handle the potatoes specifically weeks ago. When we were planning the menu, she said she had a recipe from her mother. I thought it was kind. I thought she was trying. But something about the way she carried that dish to the table, I can't even explain it. She set it right in front of your grandmother's place, and then she didn't put any on her own plate. I closed my eyes. Why didn't you say something to everyone? I asked. I didn't know, she said again. If I was wrong, I would have ruined Clara's birthday and accused someone of something terrible without any proof. All I knew for certain was that I didn't want you eating them. Me? I said. You're my daughter, she said. Like that was the only explanation needed. We sat with that for a while. At the hospital, they ran tests. Grandma Clara was stable. Her vitals were uncomfortable but not catastrophic. She'd vomited once in the ambulance, which the paramedics said actually helped. When the attending physician came out to talk to the family, he used the word ingestion several times. He asked if we knew what she'd eaten that evening. He said they were running a full tox panel. My uncle pulled my mother aside at some point during that wait. I watched them talk. I watched my mother's face. I watched my uncle's face go from confusion to disbelief to something I didn't have a name for yet. My aunt went home to collect samples from the kitchen. She wore rubber gloves. She came back with the serving dish, sealed in 2 layers of Ziploc bags. The potatoes still inside. She handed it to the nurse at the desk with a steadiness I will never stop admiring her for. The results took a few days. The potatoes had tested positive for a toxic compound, a plant-based substance, something extractable from certain common household plants if you knew what you were doing. Not enough to kill an adult in good health. Probably enough to cause serious harm to an 80-year-old woman with a heart condition. The amount in a single serving would have been. The doctor paused before he finished that sentence. He said the word significant. Grandma Clara spent 3 nights in the hospital. She came home with a walker she didn't need before, and a prescription she hadn't needed before. But she came home. I was with my mother when the detective came to take her statement. She told him everything: the menu planning, the potato dish, the note, what she'd observed at the table. She was precise, and she was calm. And she didn't embellish anything. He wrote it all down. Why didn't you confront her at the dinner? He asked at one point. My mother was quiet for a moment. Because I wasn't sure, she said. And because confronting someone at a table full of people who love them gives them every opportunity to create chaos and disappear, I decided the safest thing I could do in that moment was make sure my daughter didn't eat anything from that dish, and hope that Clara's portion wasn't enough to slash. He stopped. I was wrong to not say something sooner. I've thought about it every day since. I was trying not to be wrong about a person. I ended up being too careful. She didn't cry when she said it, but her voice did something at the end of that sentence. A small tremor. Just for a second, I reached over and put my hand over hers on the table. Tara was arrested 12 days later. Before the arrest, before any of that, I went looking for answers in the way you do when something terrible happens, and you need to understand the shape of it. I talked to my uncle carefully, gently over the course of several evenings. He was a man completely unmoored. He'd married someone he loved, or thought he loved, or thought loved him. And he was sitting with the knowledge that she had tried to poison his mother at her own birthday dinner. He didn't have a lot of words for it. None of them were adequate. What came out over those conversations was this: Tara had grown up with very little. Her family had been involved in a financial dispute, a property matter, something to do with an inheritance that got tangled in litigation, and she'd come out of her 20s feeling that the world owed her stability. She'd carried that for a long time, longer than anyone around her had known. She'd met my uncle at a conference in Atlanta 4 years ago. She'd believed, and my uncle hadn't fully corrected this, that our family had considerably more in the way of assets than we actually had. Old house. Lots of antique. Grandma Clara's property in particular, which had been in the family for 50 years, and sat on land that had appreciated substantially over that time. She'd had ideas about what becoming part of this family meant financially. When it became clear over the following years that the inheritance question was more complicated and less liquid than she'd imagined, that Grandma Clara had a will of her own and a mind of her own and was going to live for a good long time, something had shifted in Tara. Something had curdled. My uncle said he'd noticed a change. A tension around certain topics. A coldness that would come and go. He told himself it was stress. He'd told himself they'd work through it. He is a good man who trusted the wrong person. She pled not guilty initially. Her attorney made arguments about the sourcing of the compound, about whether it could have entered the food another way, about the fragility of toxicology evidence. They were not ultimately persuasive arguments. The trial took 9 months. I sat in that courtroom for more days than I can easily count. My mother sat beside me for most of them. Grandma Clara did not attend. Her doctor advised against it, but she asked for updates every evening. And she got them. On the morning the verdict came in, I was sitting in the second row. I had barely slept. My mother was next to me in the same gray coat she'd worn to my high school graduation. And she had her hands folded in her lap. And she was very still. When they read it, I felt the air go out of the room and then come back in all at once. Guilty. Attempted murder. Aggravated assault. My uncle made a sound I'd never heard from him before. My aunt took his hand. My youngest cousin, who was there because he'd insisted on being there, and nobody had been able to tell him no, sat with his face pointed at the floor for a long moment. Then he looked up. In the car afterward, my mother said very little for a while. We drove. It was raining lightly. That thin gray November rain that doesn't quite commit to anything. The windshield wipers went back and forth. How did you know? I asked her. Not for the first time, but I needed to hear it again. She thought about it for a while. I've been watching that woman for 3 years. She said finally. And every time Grandma Clara's health came up at a family gathering, every time someone mentioned what she was leaving, to who and when, I watched Tara's face. I watched the way she asked questions that were a little too specific. I watched the way she looked at that house. I wasn't sure what I was watching. I didn't have a name for it. But I was watching. She glanced over at me, and then she carried that dish out of the kitchen and didn't put a single spoon of it on her own plate. And something in my body just knew. Before my brain caught up, I just knew. I looked out at the rain. I wish you'd warned everyone. I said, I've thought about that a lot. So have I. She said, I'll think about it for the rest of my life. She was quiet for a moment. I was trying not to destroy a family dinner over a feeling. You can understand that. I think, if I'd been wrong, if she'd just been watching her carbs, I would have blown up your uncle's marriage on a hunch and accused an innocent person in front of his entire family on his mother's birthday. She shook her head. I made the decision I made. It was the wrong one. Your grandmother spent 3 days in a hospital because I was trying to be certain before I spoke. That is something I have to carry. I didn't tell her she was wrong to feel that way, because she wasn't entirely wrong to feel that way. But I also didn't think she had anything to carry. What she'd done in the time she had. With what she knew was notice. She'd paid attention when it would have been easier not to. She'd handed me a folded piece of paper under a dinner table and trusted me to act on it without asking questions. She'd gone to a detective and told the truth precisely. That is not a small thing. Grandma Clara turned 81 last spring. We had dinner again, smaller this time. Just immediate family. My aunt made the potatoes. We all said so. Out loud. And then we laughed. The kind of laugh that happens when something has been too heavy for too long, and you need to put it down for a moment. Grandma Clara ate 2 helpings. Afterward, she took my hand and held it the way she has since I was small, and she said, "Your mother is something, you know." "I know," I said. "She always has been a—" She patted my hand twice. "You're lucky." I looked across the table at my mother. She was laughing at something my uncle had said. She had her head thrown back. She looked light. "I know," I said again. And this time I really meant it. I've thought about that dinner a lot over the past 2 years. Not just what happened, but why it happened, the whole long chain of choices and resentments and small dishonesties that led a woman to carry a toxic substance into a family home and serve it to an 80-year-old woman at her own birthday table. None of it happens suddenly. It never does. What looks like a single terrible act is almost always the last step in a long walk that started somewhere much quieter, much earlier. In a moment that didn't look dangerous at all, Tara spent years believing she was owed something she hadn't received. That belief didn't start with our family, it started long before she ever met my uncle. In a legal dispute over property that left her feeling cheated by a world that didn't play fair. That kind of wound, when it doesn't get addressed, doesn't just sit still, it moves. It finds new objects to attach itself to. It starts looking for somewhere to put all that accumulated bitterness. And when it finds a target, an elderly woman and her property, a family that seems to have what you feel you deserved, it can quietly, slowly, become something monstrous. That's not an excuse. It's just how it works. The longer you carry something like that without examining it honestly, the heavier it gets, and the more damage it does when it finally finds an exit. What Tara chose, in the end, reflected exactly who she had allowed herself to become. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not that she was caught, not that she was sentenced, but that every decision she made over those years was a small vote for the kind of person she was going to be. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to poison someone at a birthday dinner. They get there one compromise at a time. My mother is the other side of that same equation. She spent years paying attention when it would have been far easier not to. She watched. She noticed. She sat with discomfort rather than explaining it away. And in the moment that mattered, in a single, quiet movement under a dinner table, she acted on what she knew. She wasn't certain. She told me so herself. But she trusted her own intelligence enough to do something rather than nothing. And that discipline, that refusal to dismiss her own observations, is what kept me safe that night. I think about that a lot when I'm tempted to look away from something that bothers me. When it's easier to tell myself I'm probably wrong. I'm probably overreacting. I don't want to make it into a thing. My mother didn't look away. She paid the price for waiting too long to speak, and she carried that honestly, without making excuses for herself. But she also never stopped watching. That combination of self-honesty and sustained attention is something I want to have. I'm working on it. Grandma Clara turned 81 last spring and ate 2 helpings of potatoes that my aunt made from scratch. And we all laughed about it in the particular way you laugh when something has been very heavy and you're grateful to finally put it down. Clara is still sharp, still telling the story about the 1974 road trip, still wearing the blue dress to important dinners. What happened to Tara was a consequence of a life built on grievance and self-deception. What happened to the rest of us? The hospital waiting room? The testimony? The 9 months of trial was the cost of being in proximity to someone else's unchecked choices. We didn't deserve it. We survived it. And we came out knowing each other a little more honestly than we did before. Which is not nothing. Some things cost exactly what they're worth.